President Trump returning to the UN General Assembly in New York for the first address of his second term to the group of world leaders.
I feel very happy to be up here with you.
The president came out blasting global institutions he believes have done more harm than good and hailed what he called the return of American strength.
What is the purpose of the United Nations? All they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words. And empty words don't solve war.
Trump has made it clear he wants to see an end to the war in Gaza.
We have to get it done. Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace.
But a number of U.S. allies, including Australia, Britain, and Canada, just officially recognized Palestine as a state.
We offer our full partnership in building the promise of a peaceful future for both the state of Palestine and the state of Israel.
President Trump said he'd quickly bring an end to the war in Ukraine upon taking office. But 8 months into his presidency, there's been little progress.
In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs.
The president also used his address to continue his campaign for the Nobel Peace Prize.
In a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars.
Throughout the day, President Trump is expected to meet with the leaders of Ukraine, Argentina, and the EU, along with a group of leaders from several Muslim and Arab countries. In Washington, Caroline Shively, Fox News.
All right, and immediately after that, President Trump meeting with Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky, backing them, saying that Ukraine should win back land that was taken by Russia during that invasion some 3.5 years ago. But of course, it was an inflection point, a frenzy of foreign relation headlines, but it literally potentially got off on the wrong foot for President Trump as he arrived there at the United Nations and he got aboard an escalator that immediately shut off. And this was a moment earlier on as he was there with his First Lady, Melania Trump, as they were walking into this venue here earlier on Live Now from Fox. Let's just listen in briefly to this moment.
Peace, President Trump.
President Trump, why did you cancel the meeting with Chuck Schumer?
All right, you're just seeing there the escalator stopping immediately as they were just stepping on. But that was only the beginning of the technical problems as he stood at the podium there before those world leaders. The teleprompter also causing issues for the president. I also want to put this up here on Live Now from Fox from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, saying if someone at the UN intentionally stopped the escalators as the president and first lady were stepping on, they need to be fired and investigated immediately. The Times reported this on Sunday. The Times saying to mark Trump's arrival, UN staff members have joked that they may turn off the escalators and elevators and simply tell him they ran out of money as he has to now walk up the stairs. Let's be joined right now by the Washington editor and columnist for the Times that wrote that article, Katy Balls. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And that was an interesting moment that immediately stopped. It was abrupt. They had to walk up the stairs, and then we saw the speech immediately after. What exactly happened, and did that moment with the escalator sour that speech?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. We don't, of course, know exactly what happened behind the scenes, but it's certainly, if you say, seeing the issues on the escalator, going straight into problems with the teleprompter, which the UN said they had nothing to do with. But of course, the previous speaker, Brazilian leader, did not have problems. And then you also had, near the end of Donald Trump's speech, one of the translators speaking over the audio in a way that cut through to cable TV and other streamings. So people started to say, that's a bit strange, you have 3 things happening at once. And I couldn't help but think back to the piece I wrote on Sunday, where I was talking about unhappiness amongst United Nations staff with the Trump administration, about the cuts, the withdrawal of funding, the criticism. And one of the things that I picked up was UN staff, at the time I thought joking, about having a prank to almost, get one over. And therefore, what I was specifically told they were talking about was stopping the escalator or the lifts. So they had to walk up.
Yeah, and obviously that kind of started the momentum, obviously the snowball effect that led to the teleprompters. And he said he would, quote, speak from the heart a little bit. And the United Nations, no secret that they have the ire of Donald Trump in certain moments like that. What did we take away from the speech? And those moments potentially maybe allowed for a little bit more off the cuff, more out of the teleprompter speech. What did we hear from President Trump about major issues?
Yeah, and as you say, I think that Donald Trump is one of those politicians who actually is quite good at taking things in their stride, and therefore he wasn't particularly put out by this and said, oh, I can speak more honestly to the group now. And he also said, well, me and Melania are luckily so fit and healthy, it doesn't matter. When it came to the substance of the speech, we know from past UN appearances, and of course this was Donald Trump's first appearance in 5 years, his first appearance since his return to the White House, that he's always brought some theatre to proceedings. Whether it was his North Korea speech, Rocket Man, or, for example, just saying why he's against globalism to an audience which is largely full of globalists. I think in this speech was really wide-ranging. They're technically meant to be about 15 minutes. It was nearly an hour. And I think there were some things we expected. So support for Israel, criticism of Hamas, talking about the hostages, criticism of Vladimir Putin, which I think confirmed the direction that the US president has been moving in of late, which is being more supportive of Ukraine, still frustrated at Ukraine in some ways that the conflict's ongoing, but really turning more on Vladimir Putin. And then I think as a journalist who's recently moved to DC from London, one of the things that was quite striking was how much was focused on Europe and the UK, and the sense that democracies and democratic governments across Europe have lots of problems when it comes to mass immigration and energy supply, and why that really worries the US when it comes to their allies.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point, and one that I wanted to make, especially as you talk about kind of the tone, the forum in which he kind of relishes to speak to all of these world leaders that are always listening in. And the speech lasted some 55 minutes. And of course, some of the major quotes coming out of it saying that in terms of migration, that your countries are going to hell. He also told that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, they should listen to him on energy. In years past, in 2018 and 2017, when he addressed the General Assembly, maybe people looked at him, laughed at some of these comments, laughed off some of these comments. Was it different? Was the reaction different from world leaders this time around?
I think it was, because they just have to take him seriously. And you can argue they should have always had to take Donald Trump seriously. He was president the last time he addressed. But you saw from the speech, I think it was in his second year, which you just referenced, where he was effectively laughed at. He was talking about the achievements of his government nearly 2 years in. And all of a sudden, these giggles spread across the assembly. And he said, I wasn't expecting that. And he pressed on. Well, I don't think anyone in the UN is laughing now. They have effectively seen Donald Trump return. Within that, there was lots of talk of, will Donald Trump withdraw from the UN? I don't think that's where the administration is, but they know that they can change it from the inside. They have, cut off funding to the areas they're more skeptical of. They're talking about a leaner United Nations, and therefore the audience, I don't think, was particularly pleased. And we don't yet know, but those potential stunts lead into that. But they have to take Donald Trump seriously. The man has over 3 years left in the White House. There's a lot more he can do to this peacemaking organization. And therefore, for all the criticism, I think there is a sense when you speak to figures who've been at the assembly in recent days that, they do want to influence the US. They worry actually more about the US leaving the stage completely. Now, they find this president difficult on some levels, but to not have America, that would be an even bigger problem for them.
Yeah, and of course, as you talk about it, some of them maybe laughed him off previously, and they may have not understood him previously as well, and understood kind of how to get to Donald Trump, because we saw different world leaders and major moves in the immediate aftermath, some bilaterals, including with Zelensky. We saw different leaders of Turkey. Much more was accomplished one-on-one than in the larger forum. That would be an understatement, correct?
Yes, I think that is correct. And of course, these private meetings, if you think about these huge issues that remain on foreign policy, the fact that the president really sees his legacy as wanting to be a peacemaker, and yet Israel, Palestine, and also Ukraine. But I think one of the things he's really having to deal with is the fallout of these Israeli strikes on Qatar. And the fact that, yes, the US criticized Israel, but lots of these Gulf states feel as though there wasn't actually an action taken against Israel. And therefore, one of the things Donald Trump has to do is, if you have some of your natural allies questioning security guarantees from the US, I think that's a big topic today, along with the future of Palestine and so forth. So it's all about the private meetings and trying to get access to the president. He is clearly the most in-demand person at the UN, and we know he leaves tonight.
Yeah, and I think the kind of maybe headline going into this, we were going to talk about what was going on with Israel, obviously Ukraine taking back. But I want to take back to kind of what's going on with Israel, because there have been different nations, France included, some European allies that have started to recognize a state of Palestine. President Trump called it a reward for Hamas. How much are there, though, conflicts that these two countries, these allies, necessarily aren't seeing eye to eye on a two-state solution? Is that concerning to some world leaders?
I think it is concerning to world leaders. I think there's also a question as to what do some of these things get you. So Marco Rubio was really interesting this morning speaking on Fox about the fact that France and the UK have now recognized statehood of Palestine. It was effectively saying this was a result of mass migration and therefore pressure from immigrants, asylum seekers into the country. But he was also saying it's a meaningless, pointless gesture, and recognizing statehood isn't going to achieve much. And on the other side, you hear some who are very pro-Palestine saying this doesn't go far enough, it's slightly meaningless. So I think there's gesture politics, and then there's the question of what is going to be the most effective. But certainly when it comes to the future governance of Palestine, I think that landing space where you can get some European leaders to where the US administration is, I think a US administration which is increasingly skeptical of what role Palestine could play, that is getting more narrow, I think.
Yeah, and obviously some of these countries getting impatient with these conflicts that continue to go on, despite some thinking that they should have ended quickly, including the one in Ukraine, because the big developments, President Trump on social media saying, supporting Ukraine in a way that hasn't been said prior during this administration. How big was that for President Trump to kind of come out and say that? And do you think there is a turning of a page for the United States in their support for Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I think of all the things Donald Trump has said in Manhattan today, it's an audience that isn't naturally on his side. If you think about the countries gathered, some of the motions, this will be the most popular. And the sense that Donald Trump is moving closer to the European position on Ukraine. If we think back to when he first entered the White House after his election victory, saying he'd solve it in a day, but also that infamous now bout in the Oval Office where Zelensky arrived and J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, they ran out of patience with him quite quickly. He was asked if you're wearing your suit. It feels as though we're a world away from that now. And, while things are not perfect, and also while the war shows no sign yet of a way out, I think where Donald Trump has taken the Republican position is a relief to those in Europe. But I also think Donald Trump has been quite skillful by obviously making it so Europeans now pay for the weaponry and so forth, which has also helped him when it comes to parts of the MAGA base who are still frustrated that the conflict is going on so long.
No, that is a very good point. Katy, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your reporting, and always a very busy day there in New York City with so many world leaders on hand. But I appreciate your time as always.